Come closer now. Tonight we're going to take a walk together. Not through the streets, with their smooth pavements and gentle hum of distant traffic. No, tonight we're stepping somewhere else entirely. Somewhere where the very air itself will tell you stories, if you can bear to breathe it in. Find yourself a comfortable position. Pull that blanket up just a little higher. Let your room settle into that soft, welcoming darkness. And if you truly cherish what I do here, take just a moment to like this video and subscribe. Leave a comment about where you're listening from so I can send peaceful thoughts your way and to your family. Now let everything else just fall away. The world grows quiet around you. Your breathing slows. And somewhere in that space between wakefulness and dreams, there's a doorway waiting. Not made of wood or stone, but of something far more mysterious. Tonight, we won't be walking down modern streets. We're going to step through a veil of mist. A veil woven not just from water vapor, but from time itself. Feel the air around you beginning to change. It's growing cooler, damper. You can hear something distant now. The clip-clop of horse hooves echoing off cobblestones, the creak and rattle of wooden wheels carrying their heavy loads. The sounds are muffled at first, like voices from another room, but they're growing clearer. The temperature drops another degree. Your breath might even mist slightly in front of you now. And there's something else. A scent on the air. Not unpleasant yet, just different. Wood smoke, certainly. Something earthy. Something that speaks of a world where fires burn in hearths all day long, where horses are as common as cars, where the very rhythm of life moves to a different beat. You're crossing over now, stepping through that gossamer barrier between then and now. And I should warn you, where we're going isn't the world you've seen in those lovely period dramas. It's not all crinolines and calling cards, tea parties, and romantic glances across ballrooms. No, it's horrible, but not in the way you might think. Not the horror of haunted houses or ghostly apparitions. This is a different kind of horror entirely. The horror of the everyday. The horror of systems. The horror that your ancestors once considered the very pinnacle of civilization. And now, you're there, standing on a dim cobblestone street in Victorian London, the gaslights casting their flickering amber pools in the perpetual twilight. Take a deep breath and immediately regret it. The air isn't clean. It's thick, so thick you can almost taste it. Coal smoke, yes, but that's just the beginning. There's the heavy sweet stench of horse manure, and there's so much of it packed and trampled into every crevice between the stones. The sour tang of rotting vegetables thrown from windows. The metallic bite of industrial chemicals drifting from the nearby factories. And underneath it all, something else. Something organic and unavoidable that makes your stomach turn just slightly. It clings to your skin. You breathe in, and it feels like swallowing a bucket of warm, wet pennies mixed with old laundry. The air has weight here. It has texture. It has inhabitants. Welcome to London 1858. Your eyes begin to water, not from emotion, but from the simple act of existing in this atmosphere. You blink, trying to clear your vision, and realize that the perpetual haze isn't just fog rolling in from the Thames. It's smoke. It's steam. It's the breath of a city that burns everything. Coal would refuse hope, just to keep itself alive for another day. But don't worry. You'll adjust quickly enough. The human body is remarkably good at adapting, and that might be the most frightening thing of all. Your nose will stop registering the worst of it within minutes. Your lungs will learn to filter what they can. Your skin will develop that peculiar patina of soot and survival that marks everyone who calls this place home. Look around you now. The buildings lean in close their upper stories, nearly touching across the narrow street. Windows glow with warm yellow light, but the glass is thick with grime, making the interiors look like scenes viewed through murky water. Somewhere above, a woman opens a window, and you instinctively step back just in time to avoid the contents of a chamber pot splashing exactly where you were standing. Gardy Lou comes the traditional warning cry, but it's half-hearted at best. This is simply how things work here. The street below is everyone's chamber pot, everyone's garbage bin, everyone's unwitting repository for the endless stream of human necessity that civilization somehow must accommodate. Congratulations! You've just been baptized in the Victorian way. You hear footsteps approaching, the sharp click of boot heels on stone carefully measured to avoid the worst of the street's decorations. A gentleman in a tall hat emerges from the gloom, a handkerchief pressed delicately to his nose. He nods to you with that peculiar combination of politeness and haste that characterizes all social interaction here. Everyone is civil. Everyone is proper. And everyone is secretly desperate to get where they're going before the next window opens above. The gas lights flicker in a slight breeze, casting dancing shadows that make the whole scene feel dreamlike, which in a way it is. This is someone's life, someone's normal Tuesday evening, someone's perfectly unremarkable stroll home from work through a city that represents the absolute height of human achievement and the absolute depths of human endurance, all wrapped up in one impossible, thriving, reeking package. Don't be alarmed. You'll grow accustomed to it faster than you think. The human capacity for adaptation is both our greatest strength and our most terrifying weakness. Now let your mind drift along with the evening mist. Our journey is just beginning. Chapter 1. Dawn. Awakening. Rituals within four walls. You're awakening now. Not in your own familiar bedroom, but in a room that breathes with the weight of a different century. The darkness is lifting slowly, reluctantly, like a heavy blanket being pulled away inch by inch through the window, small, thick-paned, and grimy, with months of coal smoke. A pale, watery light begins to seep into your Victorian morning. The air in this room is still, cold. It carries the faint mustiness of old wood-damp plaster and something else, something lived in and intimate that speaks of human presence through the long, dark hours. You can hear your own breathing steady and quiet, the only sound disturbing the profound silence of dawn. Feel the floorboards beneath your feet as you shift. They're bare wood, worn smooth by decades of footsteps, and shockingly cold against your skin. No carpeting here. No soft rugs to cushion the harsh reality of winter mornings. Just honest timber that creaks softly under your weight, whispering the secrets of everyone who has walked this path before you. The bed behind you, if you can call it that, is a narrow affair with a thin mattress stuffed with horsehair and straw. The sheets, once white, have taken on the perpetual gray-yellow tinge that comes from being washed in river water that's seen better days. Everything feels slightly damp, as if the very walls exhale moisture from the Thames that flows not so far away. But there's an urgency building now, a familiar, pressing need that demands immediate attention. In your world, this would mean a simple walk down the hall. Here things are different. You reach down almost automatically, your hand finding the edge of the bed frame. Beneath it, in the shadows, where dust and secrets gather, your fingers encounter something cold, smooth, ceramic. It's there, waiting patiently, like some porcelain genie of human necessity, the chamber pot. It sits in the darkness, beneath your bed, like a faithful silent companion. Round-bellied and practical, with a handle that's been grasped by countless hands in countless moments, just like this one. The ceramic is chilled from the night air, almost startling against your palm as you draw it out into the dim morning light. There's no ceremony to this, no privacy really beyond these four walls. This is simply life, the most intimate of human requirements, handled with the same matter-of-fact acceptance as breathing or blinking. You settle into the routine that millions of your Victorian contemporaries perform at this very moment all across the sprawling, smoky city. The sound it makes? Well, that's something they don't mention in the history books, is it? The way ceramic echoes the way sound carries in the morning stillness. Every boarding house, every tenement, every mansion experiences the same symphony of human necessity. Chamber pots don't discriminate between social classes. And now comes the question of disposal. You move toward the window chamber pot in hand and push open the casement. The hinges protest with a metallic groan that seems loud enough to wake the entire street. The morning air rushes in, colder than the room, carrying the scent of wood smoke, horse manure, and something indefinably organic that London wears like a permanent cologne. Look down at the street below. It's not empty, even at this early hour. A milk cart makes its way carefully between the piles of debris that seem to accumulate naturally wherever humans gather. A few early workers hurry past, heads down, handkerchiefs pressed to their faces. Time for the morning ritual that neighbors have come to expect. Gardy-loo, you call out, the traditional warning that originated from the French garde à l'eau. Watch out for the water, though what you're about to pour is decidedly not water. The contents of your chamber pot cascade down toward the street with a splash that echoes off the narrow buildings. Somewhere below, you hear a muffled curse as someone dodges just a bit too slowly. This is London morning etiquette. This is how the day begins for everyone. But wait. There's movement in the window across the street. Another early riser, another chamber pot, another warning cry that comes just a fraction too late. A stream of yellow liquid arcs across the narrow space between buildings, catching the pale morning light like some grotesque fountain. You step back quickly, but not quite quickly enough. A few drops spatter against the window frame near your head, and the reality of Victorian urban living becomes suddenly, unmistakably personal. Congratulations, you've just been baptized in the Victorian way. Of course, if you were truly wealthy, if you belonged to the emerging upper middle class that prided itself on modern conveniences, you might have one of those newfangled water closets installed in your home. A marvel of engineering, they called them. Indoor plumbing connected to the great sewerage system that was slowly, supposedly, modernizing the city. But those systems? Well, they had their own charming quirks. The pipes were new experimental, prone to backing up when you least expected it. The seals weren't quite perfect. Sometimes in the middle of the night, you might awaken to the delightful aroma of methane gas seeping up through the floorboards. Sometimes the toilet would simply explode. Victorian newspapers carried surprisingly frequent reports of indoor water closets launching their contents in directions never intended by their designers. At least with a chamber pot, you knew exactly what you were getting. The shock of the morning's reality begins to settle now. You close the window, carefully shutting out the worst of the street's offerings. The pale light has grown slightly stronger, illuminating your small world more clearly. Through the grimy glass, you can see London beginning to stir, smoke rising from countless chimneys. The first horse-drawn omnibuses making their careful way along the treacherous streets. There's something almost peaceful about it when you step back from the immediate discomfort. This is a city coming alive. These are people making do, getting by, creating lives and families and small moments of joy, despite the overwhelming challenges of simply existing in this place and time. The chamber pot returns to its place beneath the bed, ready for the next necessity. And you're ready for the next step in your Victorian morning routine. The morning light has grown a shade brighter now, casting long shadows across your small chamber. In the corner, barely visible in the dim glow, sits your washing station. It's a modest affair, a small wooden stand, holding a ceramic basin no larger than a mixing bowl, with a matching pitcher beside it. This is your bathroom. This is your spa. This is where the magic of Victorian hygiene happens. You pour water from the pitcher into the basin, and the sound echoes slightly in the quiet room. A gentle splash that seems almost musical in the stillness. But the water? Oh, the water tells its own story. It's cold. Not just cool, but properly, thoroughly cold. No hot water heater hums in the basement below. No twisted metal taps await your command. This water has been sitting in that pitcher since last night, absorbing all the chill that London's winter air can provide. The shock of it against your skin is immediate and undeniable. You dip your hands first, and the cold races up your arms like tiny needles of winter. Your body recoils instinctively, but there's no alternative. This is washing. This is cleanliness Victorian style. Beside the basin sits a bar of soap that would barely be recognizable to modern eyes. It's rough, grainy, the color of old butter, made from animal fat, beef tallow usually, or mutton if you're unlucky, mixed with lye, so harsh it could strip paint. The smell rises from it even before you pick it up, pungent, sharp, with an underlying note of something decidedly organic. It's soap that doesn't apologize for what it is or where it came from. You work up what passes for lather, though it's more like a thin, slippery film than the rich suds you might expect. The soap bites at your skin, leaving it feeling raw and tight. But this is progress. This is civilization. This is what separates you from the truly unwashed masses. And now comes the delicate art of the bird bath, or, as the more genteel might call it, the strip wash. This isn't bathing as you know it. This is strategic hygiene, tactical cleanliness, applied only where absolutely necessary. The face, certainly. The hands, of course. The neck, if you're feeling ambitious. And those other areas. Well, those areas that polite society doesn't mention, but practical life demands attention. You work quickly, efficiently, your movements small and economical. Each splash of cold water is a tiny shock. Each application of that harsh soap, a reminder that comfort and cleanliness are not necessarily companions. Your skin reddens where the cold and the lye have had their way, but you're getting cleaner. Possibly. The frequency of such ablutions might surprise you. A full bath, the kind where you actually immerse your entire body in water, happens perhaps once a week if you're fastidious, once a month if you're practical, once every few months if you're economical. And some people, perfectly respectable people, might go an entire year between proper baths. This isn't laziness. This is medical wisdom. or at least what passed for medical wisdom, in 1858. The finest doctors of the age warned against excessive bathing. Too much water, they claimed, would weaken the body's natural defenses. Hot water was particularly dangerous. It opened the pores you see, creating pathways for miasma to enter the body. That mysterious, invisible poison that was thought to cause disease floating through the air like some malevolent spirit. Better to maintain what one physician delicately called the body's natural protective barrier. That's a flowery way of describing the cultivation of a biological film across your skin, a living patina of oil, sweat, dead skin cells, and accumulated grime that formed its own ecosystem. Your own personal microclimate, worn like an invisible suit of armor against the dangers of the world. But today is different. Today is Saturday, family bath day in households fortunate enough to have a proper tub. And if you're part of such a household, you'll participate in one of Victorian domestic life's most charming traditions, communal bathing. Picture this: a large metal tub, laboriously filled with water, heated over the kitchen fire. The entire process takes hours, heating the water, hauling it upstairs, filling the tub bucket by bucket. And then, the whole family takes turns. Father first, of course, as head of household. Then mother. Then the children, in order of age and importance. And finally, the baby. By the time the youngest family member slips into that tub, the water has taken on a distinctly lived-in quality. It's gray, with soap scum, cloudy, with the accumulated contributions of everyone who came before. If you're the last one in, you're essentially bathing in the essence of your entire family tree. You're swimming in your relative's Saturday afternoon legacy, marinating in the collective hygiene efforts of everyone you share a surname with. But enough of such waterborne adventures. You have dressing to accomplish. The ritual of clothing in the Victorian era is less about putting on garments and more about constructing a person. You begin with the foundational layer, a chemise or combination undergarment that has seen better days, much better days. It's stained with perspiration, yellowed from multiple encounters with that harsh soap, and fragrant with the accumulated essence of weeks of wear. But don't worry, no one will see it. That's rather the point. Over this goes the corset, that architectural marvel of whalebone and determination. Then the drawers, the petticoat, the overskirt, the bodice, the jacket, layer upon layer, each one concealing the evidence of the layer beneath. By the time you're fully dressed, you're wearing the Victorian equivalent of body armor, protection against the judgment of society and the unfortunate realities of personal hygiene. And for those areas where protection isn't quite enough, well, that's where the pit posies come in. Small bunches of aromatic herbs, lavender, rosemary, mint, tucked discreetly into armpits and other strategic locations. Natural deodorant with a floral twist, the scent of respectability hiding the aroma of humanity. The final effect is remarkable. You look in your small, spotted mirror and see someone thoroughly respectable. Clean, even. The layers of fabric create their own microclimate, their own sense of security. You're armored now against the world's judgment, against your own discomfort, against the harsh realities of life in a city that hasn't quite figured out how to keep its people clean. You're ready to face the day, wrapped in wool and cotton and carefully maintained illusions. The person in the mirror looks perfectly proper, perfectly Victorian, perfectly civilized. You settle now before your mirror, though mirror might be too generous a term. What faces you is a piece of polished metal slightly warped, showing a reflection that wavers like a face seen through troubled water. The silvering has worn thin in places, creating mysterious dark spots that make your image appear touched by shadows. But it's enough. It's what you have. And in this world, you make do with what you have. The morning light, weak as it is, catches the surface and shows you yourself. Or rather, the Victorian version of yourself, the person you're becoming with each passing moment in this strange aromatic world. Your hair needs attention. Your face needs, well, considerable attention. Let's begin with your crowning glory, as the ladies' magazines so poetically call it. Your hair. It falls around your shoulders in waves that haven't seen water in, well, let's not count the days too precisely. The Victorian approach to hair washing is refreshingly minimal. Once a month, perhaps, if you're particularly fastidious. Once every few months if you're practical. Some people manage to avoid the ordeal entirely for 6 months or more. This isn't neglect, you understand. This is strategy. Your hair has developed its own ecosystem during these long, unwashed weeks. It's taken on a weight, a texture that speaks of oils accumulated and redistributed. Natural oils, certainly, but also the contributions of London's perpetually smoky air, the pomade you'll soon apply, and the general patina of urban living that settles on everything like a second skin. You reach for the jar of pomade sitting on your washstand. The label, if you could read it in this dim light, would boast of exotic ingredients. Macassar oil, perhaps imported from the Dutch East Indies. But the reality is simpler and more local. Bear grease, most likely. Or pig fat, if bears were running short. Mixed with a few drops of something that might charitably be called perfume. The pomade has the consistency of cold butter and roughly the same appeal. You work it between your palms until it becomes pliable, then smooth it through your hair with practiced movements. The effect is immediate and dramatic. Your hair becomes sleek, manageable, obedient. It lies flat against your head with a shine that speaks of prosperity and proper grooming. More importantly, the pomade serves a secondary function that polite society doesn't discuss, but everyone understands. It's pest control. The thick, greasy coating makes life difficult for certain small, persistent inhabitants that have taken up residence in your scalp. Because here's something the history books tend to skip over: lice were simply part of life. Not just for the poor, not just for the unwashed masses living in tenements and hovels. Everyone had lice. The aristocracy had lice. The queen herself, in all probability, had lice. The difference was in how you manage them. In well-appointed households, evenings often featured a charming family activity that might surprise modern sensibilities. After dinner, when the dishes were cleared and the children had finished their lessons, families would gather around the fire for what they called grooming. Parents would work through their children's hair with fine-toothed combs, hunting for the tiny, persistent creatures that made their homes there. Children would return the favor for their parents. It was quality time Victorian style. The truly wealthy had servants for this purpose, of course. Ladies' maids who were expert in the delicate art of lice removal, who could work through an elaborate coiffure without disturbing a single curl while evicting every unwanted tenant. It was considered a mark of a truly skilled lady's maid that she could debug a head of hair without anyone being the wiser. And this is why every respectable chair in every respectable parlor sports those small white doilies draped over the back and arms. Antimacassars, they're called, named after that exotic Macassar oil that gives your hair its current glossy appearance. Because when gentlemen lean back in their chairs, when ladies rest their elaborately dressed heads against the furniture they leave, evidence, greasy stains that speak of pomade and the essential oils of urban living. Better to soil a small piece of washable fabric than to ruin expensive upholstery. Your hair appropriately slicked and secured, you turn your attention to your mouth, your teeth. Well, your teeth tell their own story. The toothbrush sitting beside your basin is a work of art in its own way. Carved bone handle bristles made from pig's hair, coarse stiff bristles that approach dental hygiene with all the subtlety of a scrubbing brush. This brush serves the entire household passed from person to person like a family heirloom. The bristles have taken on a permanent yellowish tinge that speaks of long service and dubious hygiene. Your tooth powder sits in a small tin beside it. The ingredients would horrify a modern dentist. Pulverized brick for abrasion, soot for color balance, crushed oyster shells, because someone decided calcium was probably beneficial. Mixed together, they create a paste that approaches the problem of dental care with Victorian directness. The goal here isn't really cleaning. It's not whitening, despite what the advertisements claim. The goal is abrasion. You're sanding your teeth, grinding away the accumulated deposits of urban living, along with whatever enamel happens to get in the way. The sensation is like brushing your teeth with wet cement mixed with small pebbles. Many people, sensible people, simply skip this ordeal entirely. They accept that dental hygiene is a lost cause and focus instead on extraction. When a tooth becomes problematic, and they all eventually become problematic, you simply have it removed. The traveling dentists who move from town to town make quite a show of it. They set up in marketplaces displaying glass jars filled with bloody teeth like trophies. They hire musicians to play loud, cheerful tunes that will theoretically drown out the screaming. No anesthesia, of course, just a firm grip, a strong pull, and the hope that the patient remains conscious long enough to pay the bill. For those who can afford more permanent solutions, there are dentures. And here's where Victorian ingenuity really shines. The finest dentures aren't made from porcelain or carved ivory. They're made from real human teeth. Specifically, teeth harvested from young, healthy soldiers who no longer have any use for them. Waterloo teeth. They call them after Napoleon's final defeat. Battlefields are excellent sources of high-quality dental materials, and entrepreneurial individuals follow armies for exactly this purpose. So when you see a Victorian gentleman flash a brilliant white smile, remember, he might be grinning with the teeth of the dead. You're grinning with ghosts, chewing with the fallen. Your mouth is a monument to someone else's final battle. But enough of such morbid considerations. You step back from your cloudy mirror and assess the results. The transformation is complete, miraculous even. You look respectable, clean within the bounds of what clean means in this time and place. Your hair gleams with pomade. Your face, while perhaps not glowing with health, at least doesn't actively repel viewers. You've successfully hidden the reality of Victorian hygiene beneath layers of fabric grease and carefully maintained illusion. You're armored now, ready to face a world that will judge you by appearances, while politely ignoring the aromatic evidence of what lies beneath. Take a deep breath, carefully through your mouth if possible, and prepare yourself. The day awaits, and you look every inch the proper Victorian citizen, ready to step through that door and into the magnificent, malodorous adventure that is life in 1858 London. Chapter 2. Stepping out, a symphony of chaos. Your hand rests on the door handle, now that final barrier between the controlled chaos of your private Victorian world and the magnificent, overwhelming reality of London's streets. You've prepared, as well as anyone can prepare. You're pomaded, layered, armored in respectability. You take one last breath of your room's familiar mustiness and step outside. The assault on your senses is immediate and total. The first thing that hits you isn't what you see, it's what you step into. Your carefully polished boot sinks immediately into something that definitely isn't pavement. The streets here aren't paved with good intentions or golden promises. They're not really paved at all in any sense you'd recognize. What passes for road surface is a fascinating geological formation built up over months, perhaps years, of urban accumulation. And cobblestones form the theoretical foundation, yes, but they're buried now beneath a thick, ever-changing layer of, well, let's catalog the ingredients, shall we? Horse manure, certainly. Lots of horse manure. London in 1858 is home to hundreds of thousands of horses. Cart horses, carriage horses, omnibus horses, riding horses. Every single one of them contributes enthusiastically and frequently to the city's growing collection of organic street decoration. The mathematical minds of the day have calculated that at current rates of horse population growth, London will be buried under 9 feet of horse dung by the year 1950. The Great Horse Manure Crisis, they're calling it. Headlines in serious newspapers debate the logistics of a city literally drowning in the excrement of its primary mode of transportation. Where will it all go? How will people navigate streets that grow taller with each passing day? It's an existential crisis with a distinctly aromatic dimension. But horse manure is just the foundation layer of this urban palimpsest. Mixed in, you'll find mud from the Thames, which has a consistency somewhere between pudding and mortar, and a color that defies description. Food scraps thrown from windows create colorful accents. Potato peels, fish bones, the remnants of meals both successful and failed. And then there are the contributions that polite society doesn't discuss, but everyone must navigate around. Your foot squelches deeper. The sensation is indescribable. It's like stepping into a birthday cake made by someone who fundamentally misunderstood the assignment. The mixture has a life of its own, a organic vitality that speaks of decomposition and transformation and the endless cycle of urban life. The smell that rises up to greet you is infinitely worse than what you endured inside your rooms. This isn't just the accumulated aroma of unwashed humanity. This is the full symphony of a city that hasn't quite figured out where things should go when people are finished with them. Horse manure provides the bass notes, deep, rich, unmistakably present. Food waste adds the higher registers, sharp, sweet, sour by turns. Industrial smoke contributes a chemical tang that makes your eyes water. And threading through it all the indefinable but unmistakable scent of human presence. It's the smell of a civilization that's growing faster than its ability to manage itself. You're not alone in this aromatic adventure. The streets are alive with movement, and not all of it human. Pigs wander freely between the buildings, serving as London's unofficial sanitation department. They're surprisingly efficient at their job consuming organic waste with professional enthusiasm. Dogs of uncertain pedigree dart between cartwheels, competing with the pigs for the choicest morsels. Cats patrol territories marked by scent boundaries that exist in a completely different geography than the one mapped by city planners. Rats move in brown streams along building foundations so numerous they look like moving shadows given substance. And overhead, great black clouds of ravens and crows wheel and call, diving down occasionally to claim their share of the feast that is everyday London. The city has its own ecosystem, its own food chain, and you're just one more participant in this grand organic experiment. But watch now. Here comes the truly remarkable part. Through this chaos, through this malodorous obstacle course, people move with extraordinary grace and precision. Because despite the state of the streets, despite the aromatic challenges and the four-legged competition for space, Victorian society demands that certain standards be maintained. Watch that lady approaching the crossing. Her skirts are elaborate affairs, yards and yards of fabric that trail dangerously close to the street's questionable surface. But see how she manages them. A delicate lift of the hem, perfectly calculated, high enough to avoid the worst of the street's offerings, but not so high as to reveal even a glimpse of ankle. It's a mathematical precision that would impress an engineer, this balance between practicality and propriety. The gentleman beside her carries a walking stick, but it's not just for show. That crossing stick serves a vital function, prodding the street ahead to test for depth, consistency, and content. He moves with the careful deliberation of someone navigating a minefield, which in many ways he is. They pause at the crossing, these two specimens of Victorian respectability, waiting for a break in the traffic. A cart rumbles past its wheels, throwing up a spray of street mixture that would horrify anyone wearing anything less than full armor. But they're prepared. They step back in perfect synchronization, she adjusting her skirts with unconscious expertise, he positioning his walking stick like a small shield. When their moment comes, they advance across the street with the coordinated precision of a military maneuver. Each step is planned, each placement of foot calculated for minimum contact with maximum forward progress. It's beautiful in its way. This ballet of urban survival, this dance of dignity performed on a stage that seems designed to destroy it. You find yourself unconsciously mimicking their movements, learning the rhythm of London pedestrian life. Step carefully here. Avoid that puddle of indeterminate origin. Navigate around the pig that's claimed territorial rights to that particular corner. Acknowledge the gentleman with the brief nod that indicates mutual respect for successful street crossing. And gradually, your senses begin to adjust. The overwhelming assault of smells fades to a background hum. Your eyes learn to see past the surface chaos to the patterns underneath. You find a relatively clean section of walkway, just a few feet of cobblestone that's been swept clean by some civic-minded shopkeeper, and pause to catch your breath. Looking up, you see something unexpected. A shaft of late morning sunlight breaks through the perpetual haze of coal smoke, illuminating the scene with warm golden light. In that moment, the chaos becomes something else entirely. The moving crowds, the wandering animals, the impossible mix of dignity and squalor, it all comes together into something that's undeniably alive, undeniably human, undeniably magnificent in its own bewildering way. There, growing from a crack between two buildings, a small flower has somehow found purchase. Yellow petals bright against the grimy brick, it nods gently in the breeze, carrying all the scents of urban life. Beautiful and impossible, blooming in the heart of chaos. You breathe in carefully, through your mouth mostly, and smile. The summer of 1858 arrives in London, like an unwelcome guest who refuses to leave. The sun beats down on the city with unusual intensity, and something terrible begins to happen. The heat doesn't just warm the air, it awakens it. Every dormant smell, every sleeping stench, every quietly decomposing element of urban life suddenly springs into aromatic action. You're walking through this furnace now, and with each step, each breath, you understand that you're witnessing something unprecedented in the history of human civilization. This isn't just summer in London. This is the Great Stink. The Thames, that great artery of commerce and civilization, has transformed into something that defies description. What was once a river, murky, yes, polluted certainly, but still recognizably a body of water, has become a slow-moving stream of liquid horror. The heat has reduced the water level, concentrating everything that London has been pouring into it for decades. Raw sewage from 1 million people, industrial waste from countless factories, the runoff from streets, stables, and slaughterhouses, animal carcasses, human waste, chemical effluent, all of it baking in the summer sun like some hellish stew. The smell that rises from this cocktail is beyond anything you've experienced. It's not just unpleasant, it's aggressive. It has weight density, almost personality. It rolls through the city in visible waves, a brown-green miasma that makes the very air shimmer with its presence. People collapse in the streets, overwhelmed by the assault on their senses. Handkerchiefs soaked in cologne become essential equipment for anyone brave enough to venture outdoors. But nowhere is the crisis more acutely felt than in the Houses of Parliament, those grand halls where the business of empire is conducted. The building sits directly beside the Thames, and its windows face the river like accusatory eyes. Inside, the finest minds in Britain gather to debate matters of state, to craft laws that will govern millions, and find themselves utterly defeated by the smell. Picture, if you will, the scene inside these hallowed chambers. Members of Parliament, those distinguished gentlemen in their finest clothes, holding handkerchiefs to their faces like bandits. The Speaker of the House calling for order while struggling not to gag. Debates interrupted by the sound of retching echoing through the galleries. The situation becomes so desperate that servants are deployed with buckets of lime chloride solution, soaking the heavy curtains that hang beside every window. The fabric drips with this chemical remedy, turning the chambers into something resembling a primitive gas mask. Members debate the future of the British Empire while breathing through curtains that reek of bleach and desperation. This is the moment when the smell becomes more than an inconvenience. It becomes a political crisis, a threat to the very functioning of government. How do you run an empire when you can't breathe in your own capital city? But here's the most fascinating part of this aromatic apocalypse. Nobody understands what's really happening. The finest medical minds of the age, the most distinguished scientists, the most learned physicians, they all agree on one thing. Disease spreads through bad air, through miasma, through the invisible poisonous vapors that rise from decomposing matter. They're absolutely convinced that cholera, typhoid, all the great killers of the urban age, travel on the wind. They believe that if you can smell something terrible, you're breathing in death itself. So their solutions are creative. Street corners are equipped with braziers, burning tar and pitch filling the air with thick black smoke that's somehow supposed to neutralize the invisible poison. Citizens carry small bouquets, posies, believing that the scent of flowers will create a protective barrier around their heads. Windows are sealed tight, trapping families inside airless rooms, because fresh air might be contaminated air. They're trying to fix a plumbing problem by rearranging the furniture. They're attempting to cure a sewage crisis with perfume and wishful thinking. It's like watching someone try to repair a broken water pipe by opening all the refrigerators in the neighborhood. And in your own home, in that carefully arranged domestic space you've just left, there's another invisible threat that nobody yet understands. Those beautiful emerald green wallpapers that grace the finest parlors and drawing rooms, the ones that speak of prosperity and good taste, they're absolutely gorgeous and absolutely deadly. Emerald green, that fashionable shade, that's all the rage in the best circles, gets its brilliant color from arsenic, specifically copper arsenite mixed with copper acetate. The walls of respectable homes are literally papered with poison. When the wallpaper gets damp, and in London everything gets damp, it releases arsenic gas into the air. Invisible, odorless, and steadily toxic. Children playing in these beautiful rooms, ladies taking tea beneath these fashionable walls, gentlemen reading their newspapers in these decorated studies. They're all slowly being poisoned by their own good taste. The very symbols of domestic refinement are quietly killing their owners. Your lovely home is conducting a long, slow assassination attempt on your entire family. Every elegant dinner party, every refined social gathering, every quiet evening by the fire is also a gentle exposure to a deadly chemical. Beauty and death dancing together in the most respectable parlors of the city. But the human capacity for adaptation is truly extraordinary. Even here, even now, in the midst of the great stink, in the shadow of invisible poisoning, in the face of aromatic apocalypse, people adjust. Your nose, that faithful servant of survival, simply gives up. After weeks of assault, after months of accommodation, after endless exposure to the impossible, it waves a small white flag of surrender. Olfactory fatigue, the scientists will eventually call it. Your sense of smell, overwhelmed and overworked, simply stops reporting the worst of what it encounters. It's a mercy, really. Your brain, in a desperate act of self-preservation to prevent complete sensory overload, begins filtering out the background horror. The smell doesn't go away. It just stops registering as consciously unbearable. You can still detect it dimly, like a persistent headache that's become so familiar, you only notice it when someone asks how you're feeling. This is perhaps the most remarkable thing about human beings, our ability to normalize the abnormal, to make peace with the impossible, to find ways to continue living even when the conditions of life seem designed to prevent it. You're walking through hell-breathing poison surrounded by the accumulated waste of civilization. And somehow, impossibly, life goes on. People fall in love in this London. They raise families, write poetry, invent machines, dream of the future. They adapt, accommodate, and endure. The great stink will end eventually. Parliament will fund the great sewerage works that will transform the Thames. The miasma theory will give way to germ theory. The arsenic wallpapers will be replaced with safer alternatives. But right now, in this moment, you're living through one of the greatest public health disasters in human history. And somehow, remarkably, you're getting used to it. You turn the corner now, away from the worst of the street's aromatic offerings, and find yourself approaching one of London's most essential gathering places. There, rising from the cobblestones like a small monument to civic progress, stands a public water pump. Around it, a small queue has formed, mostly children with buckets and jugs sent by their mothers to collect the day's supply of what passes for fresh water in this remarkable city. The pump itself is an impressive piece of Victorian engineering. Cast iron, ornately decorated with flourishes that speak of civic pride and municipal investment. A long handle extends from its side, worn smooth by countless hands, working it up and down in the eternal rhythm of urban water collection. The spout, green with verdigris, drips steadily into a small puddle that never quite dries. Watch the children as they work. There's a practiced efficiency to their movements, the kind that comes from daily repetition. A boy of perhaps 10 years works the handle with both hands, his face serious with concentration. A girl slightly younger positions her bucket carefully beneath the spout, tilting it just so to catch every precious drop. They chat quietly among themselves. School gossip, family news, the small social currency of neighborhood life. What they don't know, what nobody has told them, is that many of these pumps draw their water directly from the Thames. That same Thames that serves as London's primary sewer, its industrial waste disposal system, its cemetery for anything the city no longer wants. The very river that just a few streets away is creating the great stink that has paralyzed Parliament. Your daily cup of tea might contain a hint of Earl Grey and a generous helping of farewell messages from your neighbor's digestive system. The water that flows from these pumps carries more than H2O. It's a rich broth of urban life seasoned with human waste, industrial chemicals, decomposing organic matter, and the accumulated runoff of a million daily activities. When you raise that cup to your lips, you're not just hydrating. You're participating in a city-wide communion, sharing in the collective essence of everyone upstream from your particular pump. But there's one man who sees what others cannot. Dr. John Snow, not the fictional bastard of Winterfell, but a very real physician with an inconvenient habit of asking difficult questions. While his colleagues debate the mysteries of miasma and prescribe fresh air as the cure for cholera, Dr. Snow is studying something else entirely maps. He's noticed something peculiar about the recent cholera outbreak in Soho. The cases aren't scattered randomly throughout the district, as you'd expect, if disease truly traveled on bad air. Instead, they cluster around a single point, the water pump on Broad Street. Every victim, when traced backward through their daily routines, had drunk from that particular pump. Dr. Snow presents his findings to the medical establishment with the confidence of a man who's done his homework. He shows them his careful maps, his meticulous records, his logical conclusions. Disease isn't floating through the air like some invisible demon. It's flowing through the water system like contaminated water. The medical establishment responds with the kind of enthusiasm typically reserved for suggestions that the earth might be round, or that women might be capable of rational thought. They dismiss him, ignore him, and continue burning tar in the streets to ward off the evil vapors. But Dr. Snow persists. He convinces local authorities to remove the handle from the Broad Street pump, making it impossible to draw water. The cholera outbreak ends almost immediately. It's a small victory, a quiet revolution that will eventually transform everything we understand about disease cleanliness and the relationship between human waste and human health. Of course, there are those who know London's water system more intimately than any physician or city planner. They're called toshers, and they represent perhaps the most specialized profession in the entire Victorian economy. These men, and sometimes boys as young as 8 or 9, make their living in the city's sewers. Picture, if you can, their daily routine. They wade through tunnels filled with the liquid remains of urban civilization, carrying lanterns that cast dancing shadows on walls slick with indescribable substances. They're treasure hunters of a sort, searching for anything of value that might have been lost or discarded. Coins dropped through grates, jewelry swept away by street flooding, metal objects corroded but still saleable. The risks of their profession are considerable. Sewer gas can kill instantly. Sudden floods can drown the unwary. The accumulated toxins of industrial London create a chemical environment that would challenge even modern safety equipment. Many toshers develop a distinctive pallor, the color of people who spend their days breathing air that isn't quite air-touching water, that isn't quite water. But they're also the people who understand London's underground geography better than anyone else. They know which tunnels connect, where which areas flood during heavy rains, where the currents are strongest. They're living maps of the city's hidden circulatory system, and it's this hidden system that will eventually be transformed by another kind of hero. Not the dramatic sort who charges into battle with flags flying, but the quiet sort who spends his days drawing diagrams and calculating gradients and dreaming of a city that doesn't poison itself with its own waste. Sir Joseph Bazalgette, chief engineer to the Metropolitan Board of Works, is designing salvation. While politicians debate and physicians argue and citizens suffer, Bazalgette is creating the system that will actually solve London's sewage crisis. Miles and miles of tunnels, carefully graded to carry waste away from the city instead of into its drinking water. Pumping stations that will intercept the flow before it reaches the Thames. Treatment works that will, for the first time in London's history, separate human waste from human drinking water. He's the sewage superhero London needs, armed not with a cape, but with surveying equipment and an unshakable belief that engineering can triumph over entropy. You move away from the water pump, now leaving the children to their daily collection routine. The sound of the handle's rhythmic pumping fades behind you as you walk toward quieter residential streets, where the pace of life moves to a different rhythm entirely. The houses here stand closer together, their windows revealing glimpses of domestic life. Curtains twitch as neighbors observe neighbors. The complex social machinery of Victorian respectability hums quietly behind these facades, governed by rules as intricate and demanding as any engineering project. Here the streets are marginally cleaner, the air slightly less aggressive. You can hear different sounds now. The distant call of a street vendor, the clip-clop of a lone horse, the gentle murmur of conversation drifting from open windows. This is where the real business of daily life happens, where people navigate not just the physical challenges of Victorian London, but the social ones as well. The street you're walking along now has a different energy entirely. Here, where the residential areas meet the commercial districts, the pace of life shifts into something more deliberate, more choreographed. This is where London's great social experiment plays out in real time. The intricate dance of Victorian etiquette, performed on a stage of cobblestones and coal smoke. You notice it immediately. The way people move here isn't just about getting from one place to another. Every encounter, every passing moment between strangers is governed by an invisible but absolutely rigid set of rules. Watch that gentleman approaching from the opposite direction. Note how his hand moves almost unconsciously toward the brim of his hat as he draws near. The hat, you see, is not merely protection from London's perpetually doubtful weather. It's a communication device, a social telegraph that can transmit dozens of different messages depending on how it's manipulated. That gentleman you're observing, he's approaching a lady of obvious respectability, and his hand executes a precise movement, a full removal of the hat held at precisely the correct distance from his body for exactly the appropriate duration. But watch what happens when he encounters the next person, a tradesman judging by his clothes. The hat movement is different now. Just a slight tip, a brief touch to the brim, acknowledgement without deference, recognition without reverence. And when a young clerk hurries past clearly, someone of lower social standing, the hat remains untouched. Not rudeness exactly, but a clear statement about relative positions in the great hierarchy of Victorian society. You're witnessing an entire language being spoken through headwear. Every angle of tilt, every duration of removal, every choice between touching, tipping, or ignoring carries specific meaning. Get it wrong. Tip when you should remove, ignore when you should acknowledge. And you've committed a social error that will be noted, discussed, and possibly remembered for months. The ladies have their own complex negotiations happening. Watch that woman in the blue walking dress. As she passes other ladies, there's a subtle ballet of nods and glances. Too deep a nod suggests subservience. Too shallow suggests arrogance. The perfect angle must be calculated based on age, social position, relationship status, and probably the phases of the moon. And then there are the smiles, or rather, the careful absence of them. You might be tempted to offer a friendly grin to the people you pass. After all, these are your fellow human beings sharing the same aromatic adventure through London streets. But resist that impulse. A broad smile, the kind that shows teeth, is absolutely not acceptable in polite society. It's considered a sign of mental instability, public intoxication, or, perhaps worst of all, American informality. The proper Victorian expression is one of pleasant neutrality, occasionally brightened by the faintest upward curve of the lips, just enough to suggest that you're not actively plotting anyone's demise, but not so much as to suggest that you might be enjoying yourself inappropriately. Happiness, like undergarments, should be present, but not obviously displayed. A gentleman passes you now, and something remarkable happens. He extends his hand. This simple gesture triggers one of the most complex social calculations in the Victorian repertoire, the handshake assessment. First, you must determine whether you're socially eligible to shake this person's hand at all. Are you of equal rank? Is he significantly above you in the social hierarchy, making the offer a generous gesture to be accepted with gratitude? Or is he below you, making this an presumptuous advance to be politely but firmly discouraged? Assuming the handshake is socially appropriate, you now face a series of physical challenges that would humble a diplomat. Too firm a grip suggests you're a tradesman used to manual labor. Too weak suggests effeminacy or ill health. Too long a duration implies unseemly familiarity. Too brief suggests disdain or hurry. And if either of you is wearing gloves, which you almost certainly are because bare hands are almost as scandalous as bare ankles, the entire calculation becomes exponentially more complex. Do you shake glove to glove? Do you remove your glove? Do you wait for him to remove his? The etiquette books devote entire chapters to these crucial decisions. Speaking of etiquette books, perhaps this is the most remarkable thing about all these elaborate rules. They're not just vague social customs passed down through generations. They're written down, codified, published in detailed manuals that sell thousands of copies to anxious citizens desperate to avoid social catastrophe. The Gentleman's Guide to Proper Deportment, the Lady's Manual of Refined Behavior, Etiquette for All Occasions. These books line the shelves of respectable homes like technical manuals for navigating human interaction. They specify precisely how long a calling card should be left on a silver tray, the exact number of minutes one should spend in polite conversation before excusing oneself, the proper way to eat soup without causing offense. People actually study these books. They memorize the rules, practice the gestures, rehearse the conversations. Victorian social life isn't spontaneous. It's scripted, choreographed, performed according to a shared understanding of what constitutes proper behavior. You're walking through a world where human interaction has been elevated to the level of theatrical performance, where every gesture carries meaning and every meaning must be precisely executed. But as you round the next corner, something softer catches your eye. There beneath one of the new gas street lamps stands a young couple. They're not speaking much. The conversation between unmarried people of opposite sexes is its own minefield of propriety. Instead, they're communicating in a different language entirely. A slight incline of her head, a barely perceptible shift in his posture, the way she holds her gloved hands, the angle at which he holds his walking stick. They're having an entire conversation through gestures so subtle they're almost invisible, expressing feelings and thoughts that the rigid rules of verbal propriety would never allow. There's something beautiful about it, this secret communication happening within the constraints of social expectation. Love finding a way to express itself through the tiniest movements, the briefest glances, the most carefully calculated accidental touches. In a world where everything is regulated, codified, and controlled, human emotion still finds its pathways. Hearts still connect across the elaborate barriers of etiquette. Romance blooms in the spaces between the rules. The couple separates now, each walking in a different direction, with the measured pace of people who have said everything they needed to say without saying anything at all. You watch them go, these two practitioners of Victorian love's secret language, and feel a strange warmth in the midst of all this social complexity. Perhaps that's the real beauty of this elaborate system, not the rules themselves, but the ingenuity of people finding ways to be human within them. Chapter 3. Behind Closed Doors, Domestic and Social Life. You follow the sound of industry, now turning down a narrow lane that leads into one of London's working-class neighborhoods. Here the houses press closer together, shoulder to shoulder, like old friends sharing secrets. The air carries different sounds than the genteel streets you've just left. The rhythmic thump of something heavy, being beaten, the splash of water, and voices calling to each other across small courtyards. It's Monday, washing day, and you're about to witness one of Victorian domestic life's most demanding rituals. The first thing that hits you is the steam. It rises from every back garden, every tiny courtyard, every available outdoor space where families have set up their weekly battle against the accumulated grime of urban living. Great clouds of vapor billow up from massive iron cauldrons heated over open fires that have been burning since before dawn. The women of the neighborhood, and it is almost exclusively women, have been at work for hours already. The air is thick with moisture and something else, something sharp that makes your eyes water and your nose wrinkle. It's not just the harsh soap, though, that contributes its own chemical bite to the atmosphere. There's an ammonia scent that speaks of fermentation of organic chemistry, inaction of solutions that would make a modern nose retreat in horror. Move closer to one of these outdoor laundries, and you'll understand the source of that distinctive aroma. Mrs. Henderson, a woman whose age is impossible to determine, but whose arms suggest decades of manual labor, stirs a bubbling cauldron with a wooden paddle nearly as tall as herself. The water inside is a disturbing shade of gray-brown, and floating on its surface is what looks like a week's worth of family laundry. But it's what's been added to that water that would surprise you. Beside the cauldron sits a collection of earthenware pots, each one carefully labeled, in a hand that speaks of practical necessity rather than formal education. Chamber Lye, Monday collection. Stale urine, 3 days. Aged water, best quality. Because here's something the delicate sensibilities of polite society prefer not to discuss. The finest bleaching agent available to the Victorian household isn't manufactured in some distant factory. It's produced daily reliably by every member of the family. Urine, particularly urine that's been aged for several days until the chemical processes of decomposition have broken it down into pure ammonia, is absolutely magnificent at removing stains and brightening fabrics. Commercial laundries know this secret well. They send collectors through the neighborhoods with hand carts buying chamber pot contents by the gallon from households too genteel to use it themselves. Mrs. Henderson adds a generous splash of this precious liquid to her wash water, and the effect is immediate. The fabrics begin to brighten, visibly stains that seemed permanent start to fade, and that yellowish tinge that marks all Victorian linens begins to lift like a curse being broken. The process is backbreaking work. Each piece of fabric must be lifted from the boiling water, with wooden tongs transferred to a washboard for scrubbing, rinsed in cold water, wrung out by hand, and then hung to dry. Mrs. Henderson's hands tell the story of decades of this routine. They're red and swollen cracked, from the constant exposure to lye soap and scalding water permanently stained by the chemicals that make cleanliness possible. Laundress's hands. The condition is called, and it's worn like a badge of honor by women who take pride in their work. The skin is thick as leather in some places, tender and raw in others. Fingernails are invariably short, and split hands are mapped with small burns and cuts that never quite heal. It's the price of war against dirt, and it's paid weekly by every woman who takes her family's cleanliness seriously. Watch her work now as she lifts a heavy dripping sheet from the cauldron. Steam rises around her like incense, and for a moment she disappears entirely into the cloud of her own making. When she emerges, her face is flushed from the heat, her hair escaping from its careful arrangement, but there's satisfaction in her expression. This is skilled labor, this weekly transformation of soiled fabric into something approaching respectability. The finished garments, when they finally emerge from this process, are clean in a way that would astound you. Genuinely, remarkably clean. But they're also different. The harsh soaps and aggressive scrubbing have stripped away more than just dirt. The fabric is stiff as cardboard, rough as tree bark. Wearing these freshly laundered clothes is like donning armor made of textile sandpaper. In the grander houses across the city, this same process unfolds on a much larger scale. The lady of the house never touches a washboard, never breathes the ammonia-scented steam, never develops those telltale laundress's hands. But the rules governing her household laundry are, if anything, even more complex. Undergarments must be washed separately from outerwear. White linens require different treatment than colored fabrics. Items belonging to different family members follow strict hierarchies. Father's shirts washed before children's clothing, visiting guests' laundry handled with special protocols. The servant, responsible for the family washing, must navigate not just the chemical complexities of achieving cleanliness, but the social complexities of maintaining proper order within the domestic hierarchy. Yet whether in humble courtyards or grand estates, the end result is the same every Monday, all across London. Families engage in this weekly ritual of renewal. It's exhausting, expensive, time-consuming work, but it's also something more than just maintenance. Look up now toward the clotheslines strung between buildings like urban spider webs. See how the freshly washed garments catch the pale London sunlight, billowing gently in the smoky breeze. White shirts and chemises, gray woolen stockings, dark skirts, and aprons. They flutter like victory flags against the grimy backdrop of the city. Yes, they're yellowed from the Thames water. Yes, they'll be dirty again within days of being worn. Yes, the process will begin all over again next Monday with the same back-breaking effort and chemical assault. But right now, in this moment, they represent something precious, the stubborn human refusal to surrender to urban squalor. Each piece of clean laundry is a small act of rebellion against the forces of entropy, a declaration that dignity can survive even in the midst of industrial chaos. They flutter there in the afternoon light, like prayers made visible, like hope given substance, and hung out for everyone to see. A gentle invitation draws you away from the steamy laundry courtyards and toward a more subdued doorway. Mrs. Whitmore, a neighbor you've come to know in this close-knit community, beckons you inside with a worried expression. Her youngest daughter has taken ill, and she's hoping you might sit with the family while they wait for the physician to arrive. You step across the threshold into a different world entirely. The air here is thick and still heavy, with the scent of illness and anxiety. Curtains have been drawn against the afternoon light, creating a twilight atmosphere that speaks of sick rooms and whispered concerns. From upstairs comes the sound of labored breathing, punctuated occasionally by a cough that seems to echo through the small house. The parlor has been transformed into a makeshift medical station. On the small table by the window, bottles of various tonics catch what little light filters through the heavy fabric. Brown glass containers with handwritten labels, Dr. Morrison's liver pills, Godfrey's cordial for restless children, Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. Each one promises relief from the endless catalog of ailments that plague Victorian families. Mrs. Whitmore wrings her hands as she explains the situation. Little Sarah has been feverish for 3 days, barely eating, complaining of pain in her stomach. The family has tried everything they know. Cool cloths for the fever, warm broths to maintain her strength, prayers whispered at her bedside through the long nights. The sound of footsteps on cobblestones announces the arrival of Dr. Pemberton, the neighborhood physician. He's a distinguished gentleman in his 50s with the kind of confident bearing that comes from decades of treating the sick and dying. His black medical bag, worn leather, softened by years of house calls, contains the tools of his trade and the hope of desperate families. Watch him as he enters the house. Note what he doesn't do as much as what he does. He removes his hat, certainly, and greets Mrs. Whitmore with professional courtesy. He asks appropriate questions about the child's symptoms, nodding gravely at the responses. But observe his hands. Those instruments that will shortly examine the patient touch her fevered skin, perhaps prescribe treatments that will determine whether she recovers or joins the countless children who don't survive their Victorian childhoods. Those hands remain exactly as they were when he climbed down from his carriage, unchanged from his previous call where he might have performed surgery in someone's kitchen, or examined a corpse in the local mortuary, or delivered a baby in conditions that would horrify modern medical practitioners. The concept of washing between patients exists only in the minds of a few radical physicians who are considered eccentric, at best dangerous at worst. Dr. Pemberton's medical bag tells its own story. The instruments inside, stethoscope, thermometer, various probes and extractors, bear the accumulated patina of countless patients. They're cleaned, certainly wiped down with a cloth after each use, but sterilized. The very concept doesn't exist in any meaningful way. That scalpel he uses for minor surgical procedures. Its blade carries the microscopic evidence of every previous patient. The slight rust spots along its edge aren't signs of neglect. They're badges of honor, proof of extensive use and experience. A shiny, pristine surgical instrument would suggest inexperience, unfamiliarity with the serious business of medicine. As Dr. Pemberton climbs the narrow stairs to examine little Sarah, you're witnessing one of the great tragic ironies of Victorian medicine. The very people trusted to heal are often the primary agents of disease transmission. Physicians move from patient to patient, carrying invisible passengers on their hands, their instruments, their clothing. They're unwitting vectors of contagion, spreading infection with the same dedication they bring to treating it. This is particularly true in the lying-in hospitals, where women go to give birth away from the distractions and dangers of home delivery. Puerperal fever, childbed fever, stalks these institutions like a malevolent spirit. New mothers weakened by labor and vulnerable to infection die at alarming rates from fever that seems to appear from nowhere. What they don't realize is that the fever often arrives on the hands of their attending physicians, many of whom divide their time between delivering babies and conducting autopsies. The same hands that examine corpses in the morning might deliver a child in the afternoon, carrying death from one encounter to the next without anyone understanding the connection. The hospitals themselves have earned a grim reputation. The House of Death, some call them, and the statistics support the nickname. In some institutions, mortality rates approach 50%. Going to the hospital for treatment is often statistically indistinguishable from signing your own death warrant. But change is coming slowly and against fierce resistance. Dr. Joseph Lister, working in hospitals far from London, has begun implementing something revolutionary: the systematic sterilization of surgical instruments and the careful washing of hands with carbolic acid solution. His surgical mortality rates have dropped dramatically, his patients recovering at unprecedented rates. The medical establishment responds to his success with skepticism, ridicule, and outright hostility. Washing hands between patients, sterilizing instruments. The suggestions are seen as insulting to physicians who take pride in their experience, as evidenced by the accumulated stains on their surgical aprons and the well-used appearance of their instruments. But here in this small house where a child fights fever, the future of medicine seems very distant indeed. Dr. Pemberton completes his examination and returns downstairs, his expression carefully neutral but not encouraging. He prescribes bloodletting to reduce the fever, recommends doses of calomel to purge the system, and suggests that leeches might draw out the bad humors that are causing the illness. The treatments he prescribes: mercury-based compounds that are essentially poison the removal of blood from a patient who can ill afford to lose it. The application of parasitic worms to an already weakened child represent the best medical knowledge of his time. He's not intentionally harmful. He's simply practicing medicine as he was taught according to theories that seem logical within their historical context. Yet as Dr. Pemberton departs, and the house settles back into its worried quiet, something else takes over. Mrs. Whitmore returns to her daughter's bedside, not with medical instruments or pharmaceutical compounds, but with something more fundamental: love. She adjusts the pillows to make the child more comfortable. She sings gentle lullabies that have been passed down through generations of mothers. She prepares broths with ingredients chosen not for their scientific properties, but for their nourishing warmth. She maintains the bedside vigil that speaks of devotion beyond medical knowledge. This is where healing really happens, in the space between professional intervention and human care. In the gentle touch of a mother's hand, the quiet presence of family members who refuse to surrender to despair, the simple but profound act of staying close when staying close is all that can be done. Little Sarah's fever will break eventually, not because of the bloodletting or the mercury, but because of something medicine can't measure: the remarkable resilience of the human body, supported by the immeasurable power of being deeply, carefully, lovingly tended. The evening light is fading now, and you find yourself invited to join the Hartwell family for their evening meal. It's a modest but respectable household. Mr. Hartwell works as a clerk in a shipping office. Mrs. Hartwell manages the domestic sphere with the help of a single servant girl. They have 3 children, and tonight, as a special occasion, the children have been permitted to dine with the adults rather than taking their usual meal in the nursery. The dining room is small, but carefully appointed. A white tablecloth covers the mahogany table set with the family's best china. Not expensive, but clean and properly arranged according to the dictates of domestic propriety. Candles provide gentle illumination, casting dancing shadows on walls papered in a modest floral pattern that speaks of middle-class aspirations. But what strikes you most immediately about this family scene is the extraordinary silence of the children. 10-year-old Margaret sits perfectly upright in her chair, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on her plate. 8-year-old Thomas maintains an identical posture, his small frame rigid with concentration. Little Mary, barely 6, has the same careful stillness, though you can see the effort it costs her in the slight trembling of her lower lip. They are present, certainly, visible participants in the family gathering, but they might as well be decorative objects for all the sound they make. They are like pieces of furniture that happen to blink breathing ornaments that occasionally require feeding. This is the Victorian ideal of childhood comportment: perfect silence, unless directly addressed, immediate obedience to adult instruction, and the absolute suppression of any impulse that might disturb the adult conversation. Children in this worldview are not small people with thoughts and feelings of their own. They are projects, works in progress, raw material being shaped into future adults through constant correction and vigilant supervision. Watch Margaret now as her father asks her a direct question about her lessons. She straightens even further, if such a thing were possible, and responds in a voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, Papa. I completed my French exercises this morning." "Thank you, Papa." The words are perfectly formed, properly respectful, and utterly devoid of personality. This is not natural behavior for a 10-year-old child. This is performance the result of years of training in the suppression of normal childhood impulses. Margaret has learned through countless corrections and punishments that her survival in this adult world depends on her ability to become invisible while remaining present to occupy space without disturbing it. The consequences of failure in this training can be severe and long-lasting. Mrs. Hartwell, in a moment of confidence, shares the story of her neighbor's eldest son, now 13. When he was barely 6 years old, young William had the misfortune to giggle inappropriately during a dinner party when one of the adult guests used a word that struck his childish sense of humor as amusing. The punishment was swift and comprehensive banishment from all family meals, until such time as he could demonstrate proper adult deportment. For 6 years, 6 entire years, William took his meals alone in the nursery, watching through the dining room doorway as his younger siblings graduated to adult company while he remained in exile. Only on his 12th birthday, after demonstrating months of perfect behavior, was he finally permitted to rejoin the family table. 6 years of isolation for a moment of childish laughter. 6 years of eating alone while listening to the sounds of family conversation from which he was excluded. The lesson was clear to every child in the neighborhood. The adult world has no tolerance for childish nature, and the price of forgetting this fact is complete social exile. But the challenges facing Victorian children extend far beyond the demands of social behavior. The simple act of surviving childhood is itself a monumental achievement in this era. Look at little Mary, sitting so carefully in her small chair. The statistical reality is stark. There's approximately a 30% chance she won't live to see her 5th birthday. Not because of dramatic diseases or terrible accidents, but because of the accumulated daily hazards of Victorian infant care. Those seemingly innocent baby bottles, for instance, the ones that allow mothers to feed their infants when nursing isn't possible or practical. They're marvels of modern convenience, with long rubber tubes that allow babies to suck milk without needing to be held. But those tubes, those wonderfully practical tubes, are nearly impossible to clean properly. They become breeding grounds for bacteria fermentation chambers, for spoiled milk delivery systems, for disease. Murder bottles. The more candid medical professionals call them, though never in front of the grieving parents who trusted them to nourish their children. And then there are the swaddling practices that seem so nurturing, but prove so dangerous. The tradition of wrapping infants tightly in layers of cloth, binding their arms and legs to promote proper development, often creates conditions where babies can't move, can't regulate their temperature, can't escape their own waste when diapers overflow. Thomas shifts slightly in his chair, and immediately his mother's sharp glance reminds him of proper posture. Behind his back, invisible to the adults, is a wooden board. A backboard designed to enforce perfect spinal alignment. It's strapped to his small frame, preventing him from slouching, leaning, or relaxing in any way. For hours each day, he practices sitting, standing, and walking while bound to this instrument of postural perfection. After dinner, the children will spend time balancing books on their heads, training their bodies to maintain the rigid bearing that Victorian society demands. Slumped shoulders, relaxed posture, natural movement. These are signs of moral weakness, evidence of insufficient training markers of lower-class origins. But observe carefully, and you'll see something that transcends all these harsh rules and rigid expectations. Mrs. Hartwell, while maintaining perfect conversation with her husband and guest, allows her hand to drop casually beneath the table. There in the space between chair and tablecloth, where adult eyes cannot see, she slips something small into Margaret's waiting palm. A biscuit, perhaps, or a small piece of cake saved from her own plate. It's a gesture so quick, so subtle, that you might miss it entirely. But Margaret's eyes brighten just slightly, and for a moment, just a moment, she looks like what she actually is, a 10-year-old child receiving a small gift from her mother. Mrs. Hartwell's expression never changes. Her conversation continues without pause. But in that hidden moment, in that secret transaction beneath the dinner table, love finds a way to express itself, despite the constraints of proper Victorian child rearing. This is how affection survives in a world that demands the suppression of natural feeling. Through tiny rebellions, secret kindnesses, small gestures of warmth passed like contraband between mother and child. Love doesn't disappear under the weight of social expectation. It simply learns to move in shadows, to speak in whispers, to find the spaces between the rules where human feeling can still flourish. The children will be dismissed soon, sent to bed with formal good nights and proper curtsies. But Margaret will carry that hidden biscuit and the love it represents into her dreams. As you make your way through the quiet evening streets, something draws your attention to a house you passed earlier in the week. The change is subtle, but unmistakable. Black crepe hangs from the windows like dark tears, and the front door bears a wreath that wasn't there before. Death has visited this household, and the entire neighborhood knows it. This is how grief announces itself in Victorian London. Not through private suffering hidden behind closed doors, but through an elaborate system of public mourning that transforms personal loss into community acknowledgement. Every detail from the depth of black in the window drapery to the specific style of the mourning wreath communicates precise information about who has died, when, and how the family wishes their loss to be understood. You pause outside the house, remembering your own recent encounter with Victorian mourning customs. Perhaps it was at the funeral of Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who lived 3 streets over. Or maybe it was young Mr. Blackwood, taken suddenly by the fever that swept through the clerk's boarding house last month. In this city, in this time, death is never a distant stranger. It's a frequent visitor, an expected guest who arrives without invitation but must be received with proper ceremony. The most visible aspect of Victorian mourning is the clothing, and the rules governing mourning dress are as complex and demanding as any legal code. Mrs. Patterson's daughter-in-law, now a widow at 28, has entered what society calls first mourning, a year-long period during which she must dress entirely in black. Not just any black, but specific fabrics approved for grief, dull, non-reflective materials that absorb light rather than catching it. No jewelry except jet or hair ornaments. No ribbons, no lace, no decorative elements that might suggest vanity or inappropriate attention to appearance. After the first year, if she chooses not to remarry, she'll enter second mourning, a gradual lightening of her wardrobe that mirrors society's expectation that grief should slowly fade. Deep purple for several months, then lighter purple, then lavender, then gray, and finally, perhaps 2 or 3 years after her husband's death, she might be permitted to wear colors again. But the most intimate expressions of Victorian mourning happen not in public display, but in the creation of deeply personal memorial objects. In parlors throughout London, women sit by lamplight, engaged in what might seem like ordinary needlework, but is actually something far more profound: the creation of jewelry and decorative items made entirely from human hair. The hair of the deceased, carefully collected before burial, becomes the raw material for an extraordinary craft. Skilled artisans, often the bereaved family members themselves, weave and braid and shape this most personal of materials into brooches, rings, bracelets, and elaborate framed wreaths. Some of these hair wreaths are enormous affairs incorporating locks from multiple deceased family members, creating family trees of the dead, rendered in brown and gray and silver. Mrs. Patterson's parlor contains such a wreath, a masterpiece of memorial art that took her daughter years to complete. It hangs above the mantelpiece like a textile genealogy, each carefully arranged curl representing a lost parent, grandparent, sibling, or child. When visitors come to pay their respects, they understand immediately that they're in the presence of a family's collected losses, a visual representation of all the goodbyes that have shaped this household. There's something both beautiful and unsettling about these hair wreaths, these jewelry pieces that allow the living to carry the dead with them always. A mother might wear a locket containing her deceased child's hair, feeling the weight of that small presence against her heart. A widower might carry a watch chain braided from his wife's locks, a tangible reminder of love that survives physical separation. But perhaps the most striking aspect of Victorian death customs is the practice of post-mortem photography, a final portrait session that brings together the living and the dead for one last family gathering. Mr. Blackwood's family arranged such a session, calling in a photographer to create a permanent record of their final time together. The young man, dressed in his best clothes and positioned carefully in a chair, appears to be sleeping peacefully, while his parents and siblings arrange themselves around him. The resulting photograph will sit on their mantelpiece for years to come, a constant reminder of how the family looked in their last complete moment together. These photographs serve a practical purpose in an era when many families never owned a camera, never had professional portraits taken. For some, the post-mortem photograph might be the only image they'll ever have of their lost loved one, the only way to preserve a face that memory might otherwise allow to fade. The business of death itself is handled with the same attention to detail and propriety that governs every other aspect of Victorian life. When Mr. Blackwood died, his family immediately sent for Mrs. Henley, one of the neighborhood's professional layers out of the dead. She arrived within hours, carrying her specialized tools and supplies, ready to transform the still form of illness into the peaceful appearance of eternal rest. Mrs. Henley's work is both practical and artistic. She washes the body with soap and water, arranges the limbs in natural positions, closes the eyes and mouth, and dresses the deceased in their finest clothes, or in a specially purchased burial outfit if finances permit. She knows how to use cosmetics to restore a lifelike appearance, how to position hands and face to suggest peaceful sleep, rather than the sometimes disturbing realities of death. This entire process happens in the family's own parlor, transforming the room where they once received guests into a temporary chapel where they'll receive mourners. For several days, Mr. Blackwood will lie in state in his own home, while friends and neighbors come to pay their respects, to offer condolences, and to participate in the community ritual of acknowledging loss. All of these customs, the elaborate dress codes, the hair jewelry, the post-mortem photographs, the home preparation of bodies, might seem morbid or excessive to modern eyes. But in Victorian London, where death strikes frequently and unexpectedly, where medical science offers little protection against disease and accident, these rituals serve a crucial psychological function. They transform the chaos of grief into ordered ceremony. They provide structure when the world feels like it's collapsing. They create meaning from loss, beauty from sorrow, community from isolation. They insist that death, however common, however expected, is never ordinary, that each loss deserves acknowledgement ceremony and the full attention of those who remain. As you turn away from the house with its black-draped windows, you carry with you an understanding of how carefully Victorian society has learned to dance with death, not to defeat it, for that's impossible, but to meet it with dignity ceremony and the stubborn human insistence that love continues even when life ends. And now, our evening walk is drawing to a close. You find yourself standing on a bridge, looking down at the dark Thames as it flows beneath you, its surface catching the flickering light of the gas lamps that line the embankment. The river moves slowly, heavily, carrying with it all the stories of the day. The secrets and sorrows, the small triumphs and quiet defeats of a city learning how to be modern. You've been walking for what feels like hours through this remarkable, impossible world. Your skin feels itchy from the coal smoke that clings to everything like a second atmosphere. Your shoes are damp with things you'd rather not identify. Your mind is full, completely overwhelmingly full, of rules and regulations, of social calculations and aromatic assaults, of the elaborate machinery that keeps Victorian society functioning, despite odds that seem designed to make such functioning impossible. This has been your day in 1858 London, a day of chamber pots and calling cards, of pomade and politeness, of death and dignity, existing side by side in the most intimate of spaces. You've witnessed humanity at its most ingenious and its most absurd, often in the same moment, sometimes in the same person. The people you've encountered today, Mrs. Henderson, with her laundress's hands, Dr. Pemberton, with his unknowingly contaminated instruments, little Margaret slipping her mother's secret biscuit into her pocket, Mrs. Henley preparing the dead with gentle professionalism. They're all part of something extraordinary. They're living through one of history's greatest experiments, the attempt to create urban civilization on a scale never before imagined, using tools and knowledge that aren't quite adequate to the task. They built the future, but they built it messily. They invented flush toilets and flooded their rivers with sewage. They lit their cities with gas and poisoned themselves in their bedrooms. They created systems of incredible complexity and sophistication, while somehow forgetting to include provisions for basic human hygiene. It's easy to judge them now from our position of superior knowledge and hindsight. But they were human beings doing their best with what they had, trying to solve problems that had never existed before, creating solutions that seemed logical within the context of their understanding. They dreamed of progress and achieved it, but at costs they couldn't have anticipated. They wanted cleanliness and respectability and order, and they got all of those things, along with cholera and industrial poisoning and social rigidity that could break young hearts along with young spirits. But they also got something else, something that emerges clearly from your day among them, an extraordinary resilience, an almost superhuman capacity for adaptation, and a stubborn insistence that life should be lived with dignity, even when the conditions of life seem designed to make dignity impossible. Mrs. Whitmore singing lullabies to her fevered daughter, the young couple communicating love through glances and gestures because words were forbidden. Mrs. Hartwell slipping treats to her children beneath the dinner table. These small acts of tenderness, these quiet rebellions against the harshness of their world, they remind you that human warmth finds a way to survive even in the most unlikely circumstances. Let those images begin to fade now. Let the sound of horse hooves grow distant. Let the aromatic symphony of Victorian London dissolve into the mist that's always waiting at the edges of memory. The gas lights are dimming along the embankment. The crowds are thinning as people make their way home to their chamber pots and their hair wreaths, their arsenic wallpaper, and their secret kindnesses. The great city is settling into its restless sleep, dreaming perhaps of clean water and fresh air, of medicines that heal rather than harm, of a future where children don't have to sit rigid as furniture and mothers don't have to hide their affection beneath dinner tables. Feel yourself stepping back through that veil of time and mist, leaving that aromatic world behind. The cobblestones beneath your feet are smoothing into familiar surfaces. The heavy air is clearing, becoming lighter, cleaner, easier to breathe. You're returning now to your own time, your own place, your own comfortable room, where the miracle of modern life waits to receive you. Feel the softness of your own bed beneath you. Notice the cleanliness of the air you're breathing. Air that doesn't carry the accumulated weight of industrial smoke, and human waste air that doesn't assault your senses with every breath. Listen to the quiet, a quiet that isn't broken by the constant clatter of horse hooves or the calls of street vendors or the grinding noise of a city trying to reinvent itself every single day. Someone 150 years ago dreamed of this. They dreamed of hot water flowing from taps at the turn of a handle. They dreamed of soap that cleaned without burning, of medicines that cured without poisoning, of a world where children could laugh at dinner tables and love could express itself freely. They dreamed of nights when sleep wouldn't be interrupted by lice or bed bugs, when air could be breathed without calculation, when the simple act of being clean wouldn't require daily heroism. And you're here in the fulfillment of those dreams. Let that gratitude wrap around you like the warmest, softest blanket imaginable. There's nothing to worry about now. No chamber pots wait under your bed. No soot stains mark your walls. No complex social calculations govern your simplest gestures. The Victorian world, with all its remarkable resilience and impossible challenges, has dissolved back into history where it belongs. You visited that world, walked its streets, breathed its air, understood its people. You've seen what they accomplished and what they endured. You've witnessed both the best and worst of human ingenuity, and now you can let it all go, carrying with you only the wonder of having experienced it and the profound appreciation for how far we've traveled since then. Close your eyes now. Let your breathing become deep and slow and peaceful. Feel yourself sinking into the comfort of a world where cleanliness is simple, where kindness can be expressed openly, where the night air carries only peace. Let your dreams be fresh and clean. Let them be filled with love that doesn't need to hide. Let them carry you gently through the quiet hours until morning comes again. Sleep well.